Ronnie, you may not want to hear my answer, but it's twofold.
I
It
do. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
it means that all of us as local pastors have to take the theological education of those that are in our churches very seriously.
Welcome to the Pastor's Lab podcast, a new resource for helping church leaders think biblically and strategically about the local church. In each episode, we will talk with thriving church leaders on the front lines of ministry nationwide. I'm Ronnie Parrott, and I believe churches get better when their leaders learn together. If you're new to the podcast, thanks for joining me. Today, as my co-host, is Pastor Clay Smith. Clay is the senior pastor at Johnson Ferry Baptist Church in Marietta, Georgia. And Clay is known as a pastor who is passionate about evangelism, discipleship, and missions. Welcome to the podcast, Clay.
Ronnie, great to be here, man. So glad to join this conversation.
Glad that you are here. Each week I'll have a co-host, and I'll also have a guest that we'll be talking with. And today's guest is Dr. Stephen Wade. Stephen is the lead pastor of Faith Baptist Church in Youngsville, North Carolina, and professor of pastoral theology at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. Clay and I know Dr. Wade very well, and we are honored, Dr. Wade, that you're with us today.
Man, it's my pleasure, Ronnie. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Do we call you Dr. Wade the whole time?
If you did, you would make fun of me after the podcast. I know. So just call me what you normally call me. Well, no, don't call me what you normally call me. Call me Steve.
All right. So
Steven.
if you see Dr. Wade out, make sure that you refer to him as Dr. Wade.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Parrott, thank you.
That's right. Clay, you're not a doctor yet. on your way.
Thanks for pointing that out, Ronnie. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
I'm just glad to be in the room with you guys.
Well, no, I'm glad you both are here. I love you both. Appreciate both of your ministries. Stephen, why don't you give our listeners kind of a 2-minute snapshot of your story into pastoral ministry, your story as a husband, father, and where you're at today.
Yeah, Ronnie, thanks a lot, man. I grew up in South Carolina. Go Tigers. Clay, that's for you, who's also from South Carolina, but the wrong college team there. But anyway, grew up in a Christian home, Ronnie, and my parents taught me the gospel from really early in my life. I came to know the Lord. So I was a teenager when my pastor, which is something, really passionate to me, that pastors call out the next generation to give themselves to vocational ministry. My pastor had an expectation that weekly the Spirit of God was working in young men, young women's lives to call them to ministry. And man, it was in my teen years where I surrendered a call to ministry. He sent me to a college and said, "Don't do an undergrad in religion if you're headed to seminary, and if you're going to be a pastor, you are." And so I did an undergrad in psychology, which set me on a trajectory in pastoral ministry to really think about the counseling side of pastoral ministry, shepherding souls. And so Southeastern at that time had moved toward a really conservative commitment. And so I came here and did an MDiv in pastoral ministry and counseling. And then I stayed on, did a PhD in systematic theology. And during that time, started pastoring a church, was there for about 18 and a half years, and came on staff at Southeastern in 2004, teaching pastoral ministry and in our counseling program. And then in 2017, made the transition here to Faith Baptist Church. So I've been here this coming Sunday, by the way, be 7 years that I've been lead pastor at Faith. And now I'm on our faculty at Southeastern still, but I only teach part-time. So primarily in our advanced degree programs in pastoral ministry these days is all I'm teaching at the seminary. But, the Lord's call on my life to be both in the academy and the church has been just an incredible blessing, man. I feel like I get to do what most guys dream of doing all the time, being both in the academy, training pastors in the seminary, and leading a local church. So, dude, I love that. 26 years married to my wife, and we have 4 children. I've got one son. He's 20 years old. He's actually at the seminary doing a 5-year BA MDiv degree right now. He's got a year and a half left in that, and then 4 daughters, and 2 of them have just recently started driving, 16, 15, and then I have a 12-year-old daughter. So man, my prayer life has completely changed. If you believe that, Ronnie.
I bet. That's incredible.
That is incredible.
The
I have 3 daughters as well, so I
Yeah.
feel that. Ronnie, how many girls?
I have 2 girls, 4 boys, 6 kids. Boy,
Okay.
girl, boy, 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 girl. The last girl is, man, it's a lot she has to do to keep up with everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We say that about our 4th child. She's a girl, 12 years old. She runs the house. She always has.
Yeah. I appreciate about you is we talk a lot on outside of kind of working hours, and I often see your family in the background of some of the times we're talking. You being a professor and a local church pastor, how have you continued to maintain your primary role of husband, father, leader in the home? How do you balance family and ministry?
Yeah, Ronnie, I'd almost rather you ask my wife that, 'cause she might say not very well sometimes. But you've got to be intentional about it. It doesn't just happen. Your personality will drive a lot of that, and so you have to set aside like just blocks of time that you're scheduling. Day off is really important to say, hey, I'm going to take a day and be at home with the family, taking sabbatical time. I don't mean that like sabbatical from a year away, just like weekly rest, monthly rest, just regular schedules of
Man, we
rest
were doing
where
so good.
you focus on your family.
Okay, great. We got most of
Yeah,
that. It was good. We missed just a tad
we
bit.
lost you there. Yeah. No,
No, it's all
another
good.
thing we should bring this up. One thing we know about Stephen lives out in the country, right? I mean, I'm talking like you look out his backyard and it's just acres of pristine beauty, right? So
Yeah, he's coming to us from one of those satellites right now. Those
Yeah.
huge satellites that are in the ground.
That's exactly right. Oh my!
That's right.
Thanks.
Why? I want to know, why do you live in the country, Steve? I mean, Raleigh is an amazing city, yet you chose to live out in the boondocks. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's good, man. So, the church that I pastored for about 18 and a half years, Clay, is out in the country. So Jenny and I were able to buy a little hobby farm that we've lived on now for a little over 10 years, owned it for about 14 years. And when we came to Faith, the church, not the Faith, it's about a 20-minute drive. Our church now is more of a regional church, and so we really wouldn't have been able to move any closer. It takes me about 20 minutes to come in. And we've talked to our children about moving closer to the church. And when I do, man, they all just kind of rebel against that.
Satellite
They
guys.
want to be out on the farm. And so we have stayed out there, and it's been a blessing. Dude, you guys know this, but over the years, we've had animals out there, had cows, had pigs, chickens, what have you.
That's great.
Man.
I do not know that. Just I don't know much about cows and animals. You're the guy that goes hunting and does all the animal stuff. That is not me at all.
Yeah, clearly.
But Ronnie
Yeah.
did have a purple truck growing up.
It was cobalt blue. It looked purple. It doesn't matter, Clay. About my
Cobalt
truck
is
colors.
actually the Greek word for purple. It was a purple truck
That's hilarious.
on the streets of Knoxville, Tennessee. So
Rolling
Hey, for real,
hard
so
on my.
what- here's the deal. So we're not shepherds, but that's the primary metaphor for leadership in the local church. So you
Yeah.
haven't been a shepherd, but you have been a farmer.
Yeah.
So here's a fun question. What has leading a hobby farm taught you about leading a local church?
Yeah. So here's a term that Ronnie probably hasn't heard either, but animal husbandry is
It's-
just
Yeah.
Again, nope, lost me.
just taking care of animals on a farm. Clay, I've toyed with the idea. I actually have an outline of a book, a devotional book that would just have different lessons you learn from growing crops, taking care of fields. Just you could imagine, keeping weeds out of the crops that you're growing and what you what you want to grow and what you don't want to grow, and then the care that animals take. Probably the most involved we've been is in birthing of animals, whether it's our sows having their first steer or pigs having litters of piglets. You have to be with them the whole time, and so, man, there's so much there. Just the care that is required. I certainly can see why shepherding is an imagery that has been used from Genesis to Revelation.
Yeah. Yeah. Ronnie, have you ever been part of giving birth to animals?
Again, I think I've been pretty clear. My background in farming is very limited.
I mean, you have 6 kids. I mean, I know you've been part of birthing. I mean, you got a lot of
I've seen a lot of births,
there.
and I'm glad I'm not seeing another one.
Hey, not the 4-legged kind.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, so it is interesting to me, Stephen, that, when you're in the academy, you're rolling, but there's still a pull toward the local church for you. A lot of guys go through the academy wanting to be full-time academy guys, and I know you enough to know you could be that. I mean, you're a gifted professor, but you have such a heart for pastoral ministry. Tell us, what was it that said, ultimately, I want to be in the local church? People could argue that you could have more influence training pastors and impacting more pastors. Why make the shift to the local church?
Ronnie, because I think I could answer that a couple of different ways. So I'm just giving a little bit of thought. I think the core of it would be that I think the local church is the center of what God is doing, whether it be mission, local evangelism, or theological training. I think the church has to be center, and the academy, the seminary is just a handmaiden to the church, which is the bride of Christ. And so, man, I've just always had a passion. And then I think I would have to say it's a bit of a call of God on my life. I've not ever questioned God's call on my life to be in the local church as a shepherd. And I can't imagine doing that. When we transitioned over to Faith Baptist Church here as the lead pastor, one of the things Jenny and I were wrestling with really was, would it be easier for us to just go into a job in the academy? You can pretty much leave that job, right? You can check out at night, go back to your classes and what have you. Whereas the church, you never check out of being a shepherd. You never stop being a pastor. And as I toyed with that, I knew that God's call on my life meant that I had to be in the local church. So it is the center of what God's doing in our world, and it is a call of God on my life, I believe, to pursue.
So
Love that.
We joke around a lot, but Stephen, I mean, I really do have so much.
Sorry, Clay,
admiration.
I'm having a hard time seeing you with those 2 lightsabers going up behind you. What is
Star Wars? Star Wars. That's right.
I'm just
May the
kidding,
Force be
sorry.
with you. Yeah. It does remind me of your childhood, your truck, a little bit. But back to what I was saying. We joke around a lot, but Stephen, I have so much admiration for you. I mean, you have such a sharp mind as you think about the church. You're a pastor to pastors, and you train future pastors. So I think one of the unique vantage points you have is not only being in the local church and having a love for the local church, but you do have a love for the academy and training up current and future pastors. And I think that gives you a unique vantage point. I would love to learn from your observations of these pastors that are upcoming. What do you see in them that gives you great hope? And of course, what do you see in them that gives you concern?
Yeah. Man, I think if I could put it down to 2 things, one that gives me concern and one that gives me great hope. The thing that gives me the most hope, Clay, is I think there are men and women coming to our seminaries right now that are really willing to risk it all and go anywhere. There was a day when I first started, and even when I was in seminary, that a lot of the folks that came to seminary really had this idea: I'm coming to be trained, and I'm going to go back home and minister there. Let me be clear. There's nothing wrong with going back home. There are homes that people come to that still need pastors and ministers. But more than ever, I'm seeing those who are coming to our seminaries really coming ready to go anywhere in the world. And that gives me great hope because that's a commitment to the Lord that is a commitment that the Apostle Paul would have. And we see in the book of Acts, anything at any cost, I want to get the gospel out. What gives me the most concern is the lack of, I guess I would put it under the category of emotional intelligence, but I don't know if that's exactly what I'm trying to say. I think it's the lack of relatability, and I attribute that to social media and the amount of time that we are isolated and alone on our phones or are relating through other means than being face to face. And that concerns me a bit for pastors having the emotional intelligence to actually have a face-to-face conversation with leaders in the church, or to stand up in front of 100 people and relate to them person to person, calling them to respond and apply the word. And so I think that's probably what gives me most concern, is that folks are more isolated than they've ever been. And you've heard this, even though they are more connected than they've ever been. The way you guys are looking, that may not have come through at all,
how do you
and I
remedy that?
apologize.
How do you remedy that, Stephen?
Ronnie, you may not want to hear my answer, but it's twofold.
I do. I want to hear it.
Yeah.
It means that all of us as local pastors have to take the theological education of those that are in our churches very seriously. We can't just put it off on a seminary. We really have to put our hand to the plow and pour into the lives of those who are leaders, those who are potential leaders, and those who have expressed a call of God in our churches. We have to bring them along beside us in meetings and begin to let them see the emotional intelligence. You guys are some of the guys that I know that have probably really, really high, what I would call EQ. You are relatable. You can read a room. You can read a conversation. And I don't know that you know how to teach that. Maybe you do, but it doesn't really matter. As guys are in proximity to you, relating to other people, listening, talking, hearing what you recognize in others, they're going to learn that emotional intelligence. I think you guys have heard the colloquial language before, leadership is best caught when you're in proximity to great leaders, right? You can teach some leadership principles, but you best learn it when you're beside great leaders.
You know, this is why I have so much appreciation for you, because when you think about seminary professor, you tend to think like they're all theologically minded, they're driven toward doctrine, but you are talking about very practical, relatable things.
Unlike Stephen, who doesn't care about Ronnie, he cares about doctrine and mission.
I know he cares. I'm saying, yes, absolutely, you care about all those things, but I'm saying, but also you're balancing that out with some real practical, like these are real issues. And you know, I know you're reading in this area. I know you're teaching in this vein of pastoral theology. Have you read any specific books or works on these kinds of things that might help other pastors out? Any resources you'd point people to?
Yeah, I think Albert Malfers probably has the best book on emotional intelligence right now, and then Gary Bradshear is doing, I think is his name, is doing the emotional intelligence work. But Malfers takes all of the different emotional intelligence models that are out there and just synthesizes them for us, and then puts a biblical framework on how we would train the next generation. So I think that's a great book. I think it's something about training leaders in emotional intelligence. I wish I knew the actual title for you, Ronnie. I could send it to you if you want to put it in the comments or link below your YouTube. But it's a really helpful book. My mind just went blank. Sorry.
No, it's great. Here's another question. Clay's thinking of one there. I can tell.
I got another book.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Pete Scazzaro wrote Emotionally Healthy Leaders. I think it's a really helpful book for guys to read in this area.
That's great. Clay, you've talked a lot about that book. You and I both have talked about the value of that book and the impact it's had on us.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, I had our ministerial staff read through his Emotionally Healthy Discipleship earlier in the year. Our elders read that book as well. I've had them read the one you mentioned maybe 2 or 3 years ago. It's great. I think the issue with all those books, they require a decent amount of self-awareness, and I think
Mm.
where self-awareness is lacking, it then needs to be made up with great coaching and feedback. And so I think that's where,
Mhm.
to your point, Stephen, the role of mentors and coaches really takes a primary seat, because a lot of people can read books like that but not recognize their own blind spots. I mean, that's why they're called blind spots. You
Yeah.
can't see them, so you need other people to see them for you, which then circles back to your whole point of ministry happens best in proximity.
Yeah. One more question for you, Stephen, on maybe your role in both pastoral leadership, but also on the professor side of things in the academy. You probably get a lot of phone calls. Well, I know you do. You get a lot of phone calls from pastors across the country who are facing various issues. What are the issues that you're hearing the most about right now in this time? And have they changed? I mean,
Yeah.
in a rapidly changing culture, I mean, have they changed over the years?
Sure. You're probably not surprised at this moment. The overwhelming majority of the calls and texts that I get are about what in the world's happening with our convention. But I assume that's not what you're wanting to ask, and it's certainly not what I want to go down the road talking about at this time. So beyond that, I think it is more, as far as in ministry, there are two categories that I get over and over and over again: how to deal with church discipline issues of leaders in the church. So I've had a leader who has failed. I've got a leader that is obstinate. I mean, the reason that people need to know how to confront is broad, right? So it can be as terrible as moral failure. It can be as simple as just obstinate, will not be unified with the rest of the leadership team. So, but the question is, how do I lead the leaders that are in this church that I'm in? So that's a huge question that I have. The other one is on the area of just what do I need to do to continue learning now that I'm in the ministry. So you guys know that the three of us, and you guys are in all kinds of circles as well. A lot of pastors have great circles of friends, but I don't want to put a percentage on it, but I would dare say the overwhelming majority of pastors that are in our convention are completely lonely. They don't have what we have in a normal basis of talking with each other weekly, daily sometimes, and they feel alone. And so one of the big calls that I get is, hey, how do I build those kinds of relationships? Or what do I need to read over the next year? And so a lot of times as professors, I'm just one of the many on our faculty that get calls like that all the time, and they're looking for some kind of community that understands them and what they're doing. And man, that's probably the most heartbreaking thing about my role as a professor, is that so many guys are in ministry lonely.
Wow. Ronnie, what's your take
Yeah.
on that? I mean, how have you? I mean, Ronnie, you're one of the more networked people I know, and network sounds like it's a strategy or something, but I mean, you're really good at.
Are you trying to
Yeah.
compliment me, Clay? 'Cause it doesn't feel like a compliment.
It is. Believe it or not, at the end of this thing, there's a compliment. No, I think Ronnie, you're very good at relating to people. You're a bridge builder between people. You love to connect people with other people. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering for you, because you may not recognize that you're good at that, but you are good at that. Is that something that you just intuitively do? Did someone teach you to do that? I think a lot of guys can learn from you in terms of how you connect with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is just my personality. I like people in general. Usually in a marriage, there's one that's the people person, there's one that's like the not people person, and I got all the people skills, and so I just like people in general. I like networking. I like learning from others, and so it's a natural go-to for me. I enjoy learning from other people in general, and so, but like a lot of people, you have some surface level friendships that you maintain, but then you have deeper friendships that you really dive into and develop. I've just seen in pastoral ministry, a lot of pastors are so afraid to let anybody in. pastors are some of the most lonely people around because they don't know who to turn to. They don't know if they're struggling, who they can trust to talk to. I've heard of pastors really struggling in sin and trying to be honest with elders, only to find themselves fully fired when they thought they would be received with like mercy and help, and they were just said, "Nope, we got to get out of here." And I've heard that story over and over and over again. Guys who will never go back into ministry because of just not feeling like they have a place to be honest and open about things.
Yeah.
So I remember distinctly there was one of my first churches I was at. I was there with a guy who was a fellow pastor with me, and we served together for about 2 years. And then a terrible, he failed morally, and I remember thinking to myself, "Man, if I had only asked." But I just never asked.
Yep.
And so I just said from that, I just want to be the guy that's like checking on my friends, asking how they're doing, man, what are you struggling with, and making sure that they know they have someone who, if I had to say, well, we're going to counseling and I'm going to go with you, just because you just need help and you need friends.
Yeah,
that's good. That's good.
So Ronnie,
let's swing back. You said, Stephen, sorry.
Can I jump in for a minute and just say,
go ahead.
2 things. First, thank you for making this podcast available for guys that may be in that position. So then secondly, for the guys that are watching your podcast, desiring that, the first step of that is to find 1 or 2 pastors in your area and just take them to lunch and start to build a relationship. And what you'll find is there's a relatability. It doesn't even always have to be same denomination. You can find guys that are in another denomination. Matt Capps, we laugh about him all the time. He would go to an Anglican guy in his community, 100%. But find a guy. Yeah. Just find another pastor in your area, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and just start a lunch once a month, once a week, whatever it is, and start building those relationships.
That's good.
Yeah.
You were talking about some of the more difficult things you're seeing. Can you tell us what is the most rewarding aspect of your own leadership role, and like what keeps you motivated in sort of the both worlds? I really want to swing over to talk about your pastoral ministry role more and more here in just a second, but what's keeping you motivated, and what's the most rewarding things?
Ronnie, I think the most rewarding thing that we get to see now is the multiplication of ministry, sending out leaders. That's why I love the academy. It's why I love being in a church that's a multiplying church. When we get to, on a Sunday morning, commission leaders to go out, whether it's a short-term mission trip of our members, whether it's a church revitalization. A couple months ago, we sent 30 of our members to be a part of a declining church in our area that was wanting some revitalization, or whether it's we're sending a team to plant a church, or we're sending missionaries with the IMB and we're commissioning them. And that's what really, really excites me. And so that's probably the top for me, outside of baptizing new converts, man. Baptism day is unbelievable. You celebrate the conversion of souls and what God's doing there. But outside of that, just ministry wise, I think multiplication is it for me, to see new works started and new leaders trained and sent out.
If we had asked you that question 15 years ago, Stephen, do you think you would have answered in the same way?
I don't think 15 years ago I would have, Clay. I wasn't as much involved in it as I am now to be able to train and send. So, that's a good question. Like, what would I have said 15 years ago? Maybe I would have said just training leaders at the seminary, right? So I was in a normative sized church. When I came to the church I stayed in for 18 years, there were 35 people there. We grew 180 or whatever when I left. In a community, by the way, that shrunk. In the 18 years I was there, the community shrunk from 700 to 500, which was really interesting. But I don't think we were as part. I think I would have said then, what gave me energy in ministry was being involved, like leading our church to be involved in the community, to actually have community engagement. And so it's a little bit of that, still mobilizing our people, but it would have been on a different scale. It wouldn't have been on leaders starting new works. It would have been on believers in the church getting involved where they are in the community?
Well, the reason I ask that is because partly based on your life and stage of ministry, what I've noticed is there begins to be a shift in terms of what's important to you. And I feel like in the first phase or phase and a half of anyone's pastoral ministry, especially if someone's listening to this and they're in their 20s or early 30s, that's a decade that's dedicated to a lot of kind of building your platform, if you will. Now, you wouldn't say that overtly because that sounds very arrogant, but you're building your ministry, you're proving your worth, you're earning your stripes, all those cliches. And then there's this magic day where it stops being about you and it becomes more about what you are able to help others do for the kingdom. And I've just noticed guys in their 40s and 50s make this shift, and the scorecard starts to change. And it's much more about sending and multiplying than it is about building your own kingdom and ministry. And so I think you would have answered it differently 15 years ago just because it was 15 years ago. And I think that's probably true for all of us. But I love that that's your heart.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Clay. That's a great observation. Even in pastoral ministry classes, I talk to students about phases of ministry, and that's definitely there.
Yeah.
The longer a guy stays in ministry, the more he's interested in mentoring other pastors.
Yeah. 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 It's good.
So let's talk about local church ministry, Stephen. You've been there 7 years, and I know you've had a couple, early on, you probably hit a couple speed bumps or hurdles along the way that you've hit. How have you broken through some of the, whether it be growth barriers or maybe more challenging church member issues or various things? What kind of advice would you give a guy who's year 3, 4, and he's through the honeymoon stage, but now he's hitting some barriers on his way to sort of being their pastor at year 7 or whatever they say? What kind of encouragement would you give him?
Yeah, man. That's a great question, Ronnie. Most guys go to like, what's the first things you do? So I appreciate you saying, hey, guys, made it 3 or 4 years. That's some of the tempting years to go find another honeymoon phase. So, man, some of it is to find rhythms of ministry. By year 3 and 4, you should be looking for what are the core values, whether stated or not. What are some of the core values that uniquely identifies our church and how we fulfill the Great Commission, right? So however your church says mission or whatever, what are the ways that you're uniquely gifted, uniquely positioned, maybe geographically, maybe even in convention-wise, depending on, the history of your church. But what are the unique ways that you as a church and you as a pastor are leading a church to fulfill the Great Commission? So once you have those, that kind of sets an agenda for you to set some rhythms of ministry. If you don't have some of those rhythms, just like in our personal lives, we have to have some certain disciplines that stop taking so much energy to do them. And that you have to set those in the pastoral ministry so that those are rhythms, and it frees you to use more energy to now say, what are the next things we want to go after? If you're still using all of the energy in the things that you were doing in the first 3 years of your ministry, then you are going to get bored. You're going to get tired of those. You're going to get worn out with them, and you won't be able to see where we're headed. So rhythms of ministry, number one thing there for me. Secondly, some of the difficulties in ministry that you're going to face, year 3 or 4, maybe year 5, it's time to lean into them and go after them. Like the things that you have seen that need to be confronted, whether it be difficult people, difficult ministries that don't advance the mission that your church is going after. Somewhere between year 3 and 5, it's time to start leaning into those with the ministry capital, with the leadership capital that you have built with some of the leaders that were already there. So years 1 through 3, you're looking for who are the functional leaders of this church. Before I came, they will be the functional leaders when I go. Who are those folks? Build relationships, begin to to disciple them. Well, year 3 through 5, you're going to use that leadership capital that you've built, the relational capital you've built with the functional leaders of the church, to actually address some of the difficulties that the church needs to address in years 3 through 5. So you're looking forward and you're looking around at some of the difficulties, cutting things out of the ministry of the church so that you can look forward and dream ahead. And I'd tell a guy, if you're not willing to do that, you're probably not long-term at that church anyway, because you're going to get frustrated.
Yeah.
That's a great word. Clay, how long have you been at Johnson Ferry now?
It'll be 5 years this summer.
Mm-hmm.
Have you hit some of those spots yet where you're having to confront some?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Well, I think my story is a little bit unique, and I won't spend too much time on that. But I came just a few months before COVID, so like everybody, we were managing through the pandemic, which I would say was helpful and hurtful. It was helpful because we were able to accelerate a lot of change.
Yep.
The hurt was you didn't have the time to shepherd people through some of that change, and that could feel abrupt to some. And a lot of people experience change as loss, and so you're just managing that through with people. But yeah, no doubt, at some point you have to take on the challenges that are in front of you and do what's in the best long-term interest of the church. Stephen, I'm interested. I think one of the things that we hear about all the time with pastors is or are moral failures. We've mentioned a couple of those already in this conversation, and a lot of people would trace that back to a host of things, but one of the primary things is just a lack of intimacy with Jesus, just a fresh daily walk encountering God. And I know there are many different ways to do that. Some ways resonate with certain guys more than others, but I'm curious, would you just let us into your life in terms of how do you keep your walk with Jesus fresh, and how do you depend on him daily? What rhythms help you to do that? Just talk a little bit about that side of your life.
Yeah, man, that's good. That's good. Thank you first for the question. I think it is an important question that we don't need to just skip over, and certainly don't need to assume ever of a group of friends like this who are just pastors together. So rhythms for me, I am the guy that still goes back to quoting W.A. Crystal here, give your mornings to God. I think my mind is the sharpest. I won't assume that everybody's is, but I would say the overwhelming majority of people, your mind is the sharpest in the morning. So go to bed early. So that you can get up early and give some time before your day to the Lord. I end up doing that in a couple of ways. First, I get up and go exercise because it gets my mind running. So the first thing I do in the morning is just physical exercise. Theologically, I don't know if I recommend that. Like theologically, you're supposed to, bodily exercise profits a little, but God, exercise yourself for godliness. So, but I do.
That's actually Ronnie's life verse.
Yeah,
I was going to ask, is this exercise before or after you feed all the animals?
Yeah. So I don't have any animals right now, but it used to still be before, Ronnie. I would go run and then come home and deal with all the animals and then go sit. Now
kill my pig and get ready for dinner.
Yeah, no, it's just feeding them, Ronnie. Just laying your eyes on them. Oh, you're crazy. But anyway, you come home, and that's where, like in my run, which I think you probably like this as well, Clay, if I remember from some conversations, my run in the mornings is walking through a prayer list. I learned this from John Piper, concentric circles. So I don't take a written prayer list with me. I just go concentric circles out from praying for my relationship with the Lord and my family, and go out like that, elders, church, what have you, and do what I can through that prayer time. If there's some more time that I need to spend, then I'll spend that. And then I'm reading in the mornings at home. Sometimes I'm waiting on girls to be ready to bring them to school, so I'm reading there. And then when I get to the office, typically I come into the office in the first 30 to 45 minutes, an hour, just devotional study that then leads into at least 3 mornings a week sermon study. And so those mornings for me are often just in the Word. And so that's a rhythm that I've just been blessed by and committed to. And again, it's rhythms that you set that the more that you do them, the less energy it takes. Like the more that you get up when your alarm clock goes off at 5:20 or whatever time it is, the less energy it takes to actually get up at 5:20, right? The more that you're committed to go to bed early enough to get up and before your day starts, the less energy it's going to take the more that you do that. So I'm big on those rhythms like that.
Yeah.
And so then, man, our church does a Bible reading plan. I listen to it on the just an app, so I'm always trying to listen to the words. I'm reading the word. I tell students all the time, don't just take the word in through your eyes, take it in through your ears. So I'm listening to sermons while I'm writing. I use my drive if I'm not a couple mornings a week. I'm not bringing my girls to school, and so I use the morning drive to listen to sermons and scripture. And I use the afternoon drive to do phone calls and catch up on text or Marco Polo or whatever.
That's helpful.
Good. Speaking of rhythms, Ronnie has a rhythm of getting ice cream.
What are we doing?
I love Stephen's running in the morning, and Ronnie's getting Rocky Road. So it's
yeah. I'm hitting the weights in the morning too. I'm out there. I'm getting it done.
We can tell.
And then I'm also hitting the cones in the afternoon. So it's all good. Hitting the cones. It's great. Oh, man. Hey, Stephen. So we're going to head to our closure here. But if there's a guy listening here and he's struggling with the attitude of going forward in ministry. He's just like, man, I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I don't know what to do. I'm tired of preaching. The people won't follow me. It's just really hard right now. What kind of advice would you give that guy?
Yeah, do whatever it takes to get a little bit of time where the pressure can go off for a couple of days and spend some time with the Lord. Clarify your call, and let that restore the joy and the passion. And if that doesn't get you there, then you got to pull some other folks into that. Go call a mentor, go call an older brother in the ministry and let them know that you're struggling, and then go spend an afternoon with them, just talking through the struggles. Like, we need one another and we're stronger together. So those are two steps that I would wholeheartedly recommend to a guy that really is struggling in ministry.
That's great. Well, go ahead, Clay.
I'll say one other question. I just love Stephen the same way of giving advice. Let's say a guy's in the ministry and he's not questioning his call, but he just wants to grow. He wants to learn. Are there any really helpful books for ministry that have been influential for you? Maybe that kind of top 2 or 3 list resources that you'd love to give guys to say, this might benefit you as well.
Yeah, man. 2 things come to mind that I send guys to quite often. One, more Puritanesque, religious affections. Some guys can't get into that, but man, when I'm
reading, a little light reading.
It's a guy named John Owen. I mean,
yeah,
that's Jonathan Edwards.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you could read Jonathan.
One of those Johns.
Yeah, you could read John Owen too on his putting to death the deeds of the body.
The death of death.
Yeah, mortification of sin. You can read it. You should pick up Mortification of Sin by John Owen. Man, the other thing for me, Clay, I know we got to close. My mind is going blank on this. Dude, I'm trying to look at my shelf right now. I know the book is on my shelf and I can't call it. Who's the
Jabez?
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Bruce Wilkinson.
Oh my goodness. You guys are great.
Territory.
What is it? It's almost there. Never mind. I'm not going to be able to call it up. My mind just went blank, Clay.
I'm going to move forward. You're going to remember it in just a second.
You are. I will.
That's great. Well, let me just ask you this: where can people find you? What's your church's website if they want to come watch a sermon?
Yeah, faithnc.org. Faithnc.org.
I do want to say I've watched many of your sermons. I've heard you preach, and man, you're an excellent preacher. Yeah. You've been a personal a resource and encouragement to me. You've been a friend to me, and you've been at times a counselor to me, and I'm thankful for you and your love for me and Marcy and all the ways that you encourage just me and Clay. I'm thankful for Clay too. Yeah. Thanks for both of you guys being on our podcast today. appreciate your time and your leadership in the broader evangelical world, and excited to continue to see how God uses you both in the days and months ahead. I want to thank everyone for listening today. Just one last time, Stephen, you got the book yet?
I can't. I can't call it in my head. I'm sitting here
just making sure.
My brain about it.
Well, listen, for all the listeners today, if you're enjoying what you've heard, be sure to rate, review, subscribe to the podcast or on whatever platform you're listening on. When you do, it helps the podcast grow. And as we grow, we're able to have more conversations just like this one with some of the best leaders across the country. Hey, thanks for listening today, and we'll see you on the next episode.